Not bad. Not bad.
Hello? Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Okay, great. We're going to get started. So for those of you who I don't know, I'm Jenny Rushlow. I'm the interim graduate school dean, and I oversee environmental programs here at Vermont Law School.
Yay, Jenny.
Thank you. So this is a surreal moment. I work with this guy a lot, and I'm not used to introducing him in such a way. But our very own Professor Pat Parenteau is receiving our environmental honorary degree this year.
And a check?
They didn't tell you about that? Must have gotten lost in the mail. And we're incredibly pleased to be able to offer this recognition to Professor Parenteau. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He is retiring from Vermont Law School after 30 years, right?
Close. Real close.
He is leaving as his most recent position, having been professor of law and senior counsel with the Environmental Advocacy Clinic, which he helped found. He didn't help found, he founded it in 2004 when it was called the VLS Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic, which has been a model for environmental law clinics, not just nationwide, but worldwide. We've had visitors from Asia and all over the world wanting to learn how to set up environmental clinics like that. He also previously served in one of my roles right now, director of the Environmental Law Center, for 6 years. He actually started his career in legal aid, which you may not know. And after that, he continued to do public interest work in a variety of settings. He was at National Wildlife Federation for 8 years, where he was vice president for conservation. And he went on to hold a number of high-level positions as a public official, if you can believe it, including special counsel to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, commissioner of the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and regional counsel to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Region 1.
Couldn't hold a job.
Yeah. His presence in the media is absolutely unmatched. He's interviewed what feels like daily for the New York Times, NPR, Bloomberg, Washington Post, just to name a few. He's written book chapters and law review articles and many opinion pieces, which appear regularly in everything from law journals to national newspapers to other publications, and his ability to stay up to date on what's going on in the news with environmental law is unbelievable and intimidating, frankly,
Doesn't have a real life.
makes it possible for him to take any reporter call at any minute, because most lawyers would say, I'm kind of, I haven't read the case all the way, or, I'm not totally sure I'm up to date. Not this guy. He'll talk to anybody, anytime, which is why he's in the newspaper all the time. It's an incredible skill. He holds a bachelor's from Regis University, a JD from Creighton University, and an LLM in environmental law from George Washington, only because we didn't have ours yet.
Right.
And this fall, he'll start his second term as a Fulbright scholar in Ireland at the University College Cork. And he's widely recognized as an expert in all things environmental law, but especially for climate change, water pollution, and wildlife protection. And he's equally widely recognized for his large and passionate personality, which he thankfully has applied to the cause of environmentalism for what seems to be his whole life. And he's been fearless and unrelenting in his service to the environment and to VLS, and this institution owes him a lot. His talk today is titled The First Generation of Environmental Advocacy and Lessons for the Next. Please join me in congratulating Professor Pat Parenteau.
Thanks, sweetie. We're damn lucky to have her, I'll tell you that. So I thought about starting this by playing Bruce Springsteen's Glory Days. And then I thought, well, no, that's sort of like it's over. And it isn't over. It's never over. So what I'm going to do with you for a little while, And I do welcome questions, by the way. I love questions. And objections, properly grounded objections, of course. What I'm going to do is take you through my life, my career as an environmental advocate. That's what I think of myself as, an advocate. I'm not neutral, never professed to be neutral. I don't think environmental law is neutral. I don't think it's value-free. So not everybody agrees with me on much of anything. In fact, one of the best comments I ever heard for a talk I gave, Zig, this is my friend Zig Plotter here. I gave this talk. He's sort of a famous guy too. There's another famous guy over here named Gus Beth that you should all know about. And this talk I gave was in Tennessee, Zig. And I was opposed to a road that was being built between two sort of primitive areas, which became wilderness areas in due course, national forest areas. And this was what I called a stupid highway between two podunk towns. That's probably not the kind of style, that you want to use when you're speaking to an audience in rural North Carolina. But I did that. I was a young whippersnapper lawyer, and as I got done, I was in high dudgeon, as I usually get. I might even get tonight, I don't know. I left the stage, and I was walking out, and a guy walked up to me and I said, "I didn't agree with anything you said, but I sure did like the way you said it." So I'm going to relive what I've seen, maybe what I've learned, over 50 years of practicing environmental law. Let that sink in for a minute. I know I don't look it, but every follicle I've lost, I've earned. So I'm going to take you back to the 1970s, where it all began. I was in law school when Earth Day came down April 22nd, 1970. Second semester 1L. And there wasn't much happening in Omaha, Nebraska in 1970, or maybe even today. So the whole idea of environmentalism hadn't really sort of caught on in the prairies. So I went to the dean and I said, "I think we need an environmental course." And Dean Skolnick said, "No, we don't." And so I petitioned the thing called the Curriculum Committee. Some of you are aware of this institution. And I caught the attention of a little leprechaun law professor named Michael J. O'Reilly. And he loved the idea, as he did almost everything. He was a very energetic law professor. He was my favorite law professor. He was really an early sort of inspiration, I guess, for me to even think about becoming a law professor at some time. And so he said, "I'll do it." So he taught a summer course, 1971, on this law that he called NEPA, this brand new law, this brand new environmental law, the NEPA. And he was a New Yorker, and he talked like a New Yorker. And he said, "You got to know about this NEPA." And so I said, "Okay." I mean, it was me and three other guys, right? And in those days, it was guys. My graduating class, 1972, 3 women. So there's a change. Footnote, a really important, damn important change everywhere. So I learned this law, and I did start off in legal services, which in those days, if you were a legal services lawyer, you did everything. I mean, I would walk into this little office in South Omaha near the stockyards, and you could smell the stockyards in my office. And they were the biggest in the world at the time. And so for Dulcie, this was the charnel house, Dulcie. I mean, I was listening to the cows screaming on the way to the slaughterhouse. That's Omaha for you. So anyway, I never knew what was going to be on my desk when I walked into the office every morning. And the head of the office would just hand me a folder and say, "You're due in court." And I'd say, "Which court?" He said, "Well, municipal court. That's where evictions are." Go on. And I said, where's the municipal court? And he said, look it up. And of course, in those days, you didn't, sort of use your phone. You went to the yellow pages, to find where the Omaha Municipal Court was. I'm not kidding you. And then I said on my way out the door, I got the address. On the way out the door, I said, by the way, what's an eviction exactly? It wasn't called an eviction. It was called forcible entry and detainer. And it was a quasi-criminal action. And so one of the first things I did when I got one of these cases, and I would say to my client, you're going to be evicted because you're not paying your rent. Why the hell aren't you paying your rent? Duh, right? And they show me their health bills, and they show me, their not credit cards, but their debts and so forth, and they can't pay their rent. And there's 2 kids, single mom, and so I said, this isn't right. You can't throw these people out like this. There's got to be a way to fight this, right? So I said, wait a minute. If it's a quasi-criminal action, I remember this thing from law school called the Sixth Amendment, right? Right to trial by jury, right? I said, if this is quasi-criminal, where's the jury? And so the judge said, there ain't no jury in municipal court. And I said, that's your problem. And I actually got the Nebraska Supreme Court to strike down the forcible entry and detainer law as unconstitutional for deprivation of Sixth Amendment right to trial by jury. That's what gave me the idea. The law can be a really powerful thing, for good or evil. So I'm going to deploy whatever little skills I might have, and I'm not going to overstate them. I'm good, but I'm not great. I'm not goat. I'm good, but I'm not a goat. Well, I've been a goat, but I'm not the greatest ever. No. But I'm good. So I said, I got to find a way to learn more about this environmental stuff. So I had a client come in one day from Council Bluffs, across the river, Missouri River, the Big Mo. Our jurisdiction spanned both Omaha and Council Bluffs. I also went up to the Pine Ridge Reservation. I had native clients, a lot of them. And so this is a black family in what in those days would be called a ghetto, a low-income community of predominantly African-American black citizens. And it turned out the Iowa Highway Department thought it would be a great idea to put a big fat interchange from Interstate 80. I don't know how many of you have traveled Interstate 80. Ugly. All interstates are pretty much ugly. 91 isn't bad. So I said, I got to figure out if I can use this NEPA thing that Michael J. O'Reilly told me I should use. But I didn't know how to do it. I mean, I just said, I wonder which court I'm going to go to for that, because I had been in municipal court, county court, district court, juvenile court, federal district court, U.S. State Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, 8th Circuit. I've been in everywhere else, but I said, I don't really know where you go with this NEPA thing. So I heard about, and I don't even remember now how I heard, because we didn't have internet. Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. So we didn't have that tool. I guess it must have been ordinary mail and a flyer for a conference in St. Louis on NEPA. And when I got to St. Louis to this conference, I found out, it's actually NEPA. So my first lesson was, don't go around talking about NEPA, because then you're going to be called out as a real rookie. And I met this lawyer in St. Louis at this highway fighters conference. That's what it was. I mean, they called it, whatever they called it, CLE thing, but it was a highway fighters conference. And his name was Harvey Carter. Now, I don't know if there's anybody in this room who actually knows Harvey, except for Kevin. Kevin would know Harvey. Chris would know Harvey. Harvey Carter was a great state senator, great lawyer in Vermont, passed away, a year and a half ago, a couple of years maybe. I lose track of time. And Harvey was fighting the expansion of Route 7 through Bennington. That was where he practiced law. And he brought one of the very first successful NEPA cases Conservation Society of Southern Vermont versus Department of Transportation. And he won a huge victory. And he stopped the highway expansion. Now people would probably love to see Route 7 turned into an interstate highway, probably, given the congestion. As if highways solved congestion, which, of course, they don't. They make traffic. That's what highways do. So I went back, brought that case, and stopped that interchange, and it never got built. Not because I stopped it, because it was stupid. It was a bad idea. And the Iowa Highway Department found other uses for the money. That's one of the first lessons I learned that I'll share with you, of about maybe 20. And that is, the law is a tool, and that's all it is. It's not an end in itself. Lawsuits are a tool. Lawsuits really are a last resort. They really, truly are a last resort. They're best used as leverage for negotiation to achieve the client's objectives, which means you have to understand what the client's objectives are and listen carefully to what the client's objectives are, and don't disagree with what the client's objectives are. If you don't like the client's objectives, then don't take the case if you have that luxury. And sometimes you will have that luxury, and sometimes you won't have that luxury. You always have the luxury of quitting, but that's not a great option. So I did understand that even though this NEPA law wasn't going to stop the highway, it would slow it down, it would create delay, it would give the community a seat at the table, it would give them a voice, it would give them some potential to influence, it would buy them some time for a political solution, for some other thing to happen to achieve their objective of protecting their community. This interchange would have split their community, their schools and their recreational facilities and their homes. It would have gone right smack in the middle of it and made a wreck of it, right? That's what highways and interchanges often do. So that was a really valuable lesson. Use the law as a tool, use it for leverage, but negotiate. Figure out what you can do to achieve the ultimate objective at the time that you've given yourself and the leverage that you've given yourself. Boy, did I use that over and over and over and over again in everything that I've done. And my career is interesting to me, and maybe to you, because I have touched every point of the compass. I've been a public interest lawyer, I've been a federal lawyer, I've been a state lawyer administrator, I've been a private lawyer, I've been in an international work. I've done it all. I'm damn lucky. I hope the youngsters in the room are as lucky as I've been to have the career I've had. So I left Omaha, went to George Washington University. I knew that the center of gravity in those days was the Beltway in Washington, D.C. That was where the power was. That's where the, quote, public interest environmental law world was. So I figured I've got to go there, knock on some doors, kick some doors down, which is ultimately what I had to do. And I sort of needed a credential better than Creighton University, which is a great law school with a really good basketball team, but not exactly what the environmental community in 1972 was looking for. And I was told that, flat out. Oh, are you kidding? Go back to Omaha. I was told that many, many times. But I stuck in there, and I got this LLM, working with Arnold Wrightsey, the wonderful, curmudgeonly Arnold Wrightsey, from whom I learned an enormous amount. And I ran into this fellow named Oliver Houck, because Arnold Wrightsey told me to go look up Mr. Houck, who was general counsel of the National Wildlife Federation, and who became my mentor and who gave me my chance. And he said, prove it, prove you can do it. He threw a file at me, and he said, find a solution to this. And the file was about a proposed Corps of Engineers dam, which was originally called Trotter's Shoals on the Savannah River, beautiful river. You know the river, Zig. Beautiful trout river, fantastic, big browns, spots as big as quarters, these browns. And as usual, it was running water, so the Corps of Engineers is not going to have any of that. That's what this river needs, and what this river wants is a dam. So our affiliate organization to the National Wildlife Federation didn't want the dam because they like the fish. This is a sporting organization, very Republican organization, and that'll come back into a little story I want to tell you. I won't tell you all these stories, and if you've heard enough, just raise your hand and I'll stop. But I don't know, stories are fun for me. I hope maybe a little bit fun for you. So he threw me this file and he said, now I know that there's always a NEPA lawsuit, okay? I'm not interested in that. They probably did a lousy EIS, environmental impact statement, but I want more. I want you to find something else. Prove to me you can cut it. So I said, oh, okay. I went back, and in those days, you know, again, you didn't have this internet stuff. You didn't have everything in your pocket on a phone. What we had was the Library of Congress. That's what we had. And so you go to the Library of Congress in those days, and you sit at little tables with little green lampshades, and you write on a piece of paper what you're looking for, and a little person would appear and take the piece of paper and disappear and wait. And then you'd get a book. And so that's the way it works, see? So I'm trying to figure out, okay, what kind of a new theory can I come up with to attack this dam that isn't NEPA? Because, boy, I was ready for NEPA. And I thought of, well, there's a thing called the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act. I found that and ran across that, and nobody knew too much about that because it's a 1934 law, right? And I thought, well, there's something. It's a NEPA-like law, you know, consultation and document what you're doing and try to be careful, but if you can't be careful, go ahead. But that wasn't good enough. So I said, well, wait a minute. They're talking about building this big dam, a hydroelectric dam, flood control, hydroelectric, recreation, that kind of stuff, right? Big boats, big bass boats, you know, meat throwers, all that stuff. So I said, what do these dams do? And so I started doing some research, and it turns out a whole bunch of research had been done on TVA. Mr. Plotter knows something about TVA. There's this case called TVA versus Hall, is it? No. Oh, yeah, that's right. TVA versus Hill. Now, this is a story for you. This guy knows how to practice law. One case, Supreme Court, one victory, I'm done. That's how you do it. 1,000, batting 1,000 in the United States Supreme Court. I think he's the only guy in the world to say that. So I said, all right, how big are these dams? What do they do? These studies said to me, well, they cause all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. There's this thing called nitrogen supersaturation. So when the water spills over the dam down into the spillway, it entrains nitrogen in the water. It's the gas bubble disease, if you're familiar with that in deep water in diving. So fish explode. And it also sucks metals out of the sediments under the dam because it's in an anaerobic condition. And those metals then come into the discharge, and they go downstream, and they get in the fish, and that's not good. It's metals like copper and aluminum and other things like that. It's not good. But sometimes these dams fill up with sediment, so then you got to flush the sediment. So then when the sediment goes down, it coats the bottom of the stream, and that ruins trout habitat, and we don't like that at all. So I said, you know what these dams are? By golly, they're point sources. They're point sources of pollution. And if they're point sources of pollution, they need a permit under the Clean Water Act, because I found that in the books. There it was in black and white, 5027, point source, discharge of pollutants to waters of the United States. Well, the Savannah River is big enough to be a water of anything, so it was clearly a water of the United States. So pleased as punch, I took this into Oliver and said, here's your handle. Not just this dam, all dams. Every dam in the United States needs a permit. Now this is thinking big. This is thinking real big. This is what I signed up for. This is law reform, right? So he said, prove it. Bring that lawsuit in South Carolina, federal district court, because that's where we had to bring it, and win it. And I was smart enough at that point because I had met a friend of Oliver's named Norton Tennille who was with this firm called Arnold and Porter. And Norton was a big-time lawyer. I was a squirt lawyer. He was big time. And he said, I'll argue it. I'll do it. I'll argue it. And he did it, and he won it. And I said, okay, Oliver, can I go from there? He said, yep. So I petitioned our former dean, Douglas Costel, to write a regulation requiring that all dams in the United States of a certain dimension, because when I found out, the other thing I learned, lesson 2, really understand the consequences of the arguments that you're making. Understand the scope of what you're asking the courts to do, asking the government to do, asking the world to do, right? Do you know how many dams there are in the United States? I did at one time. It was over 1 million. So I kind of slowed down a little bit, cooled my jets, and said, I probably am not going to get a court to order 1 million dams to get permits. Probably not going to work. So I said, how do I carve this down so that maybe it's a winnable case? That's the other thing you got to always think about, is not just, do I have an argument? Of course you do. Do I have a lawsuit? Duh. Yeah, we always have a lawsuit. What, can you win it? How can you win it? What are you asking the judicial system, the courts to do? What are you asking this particular judge to do? Who is this judge? Who appointed this judge? How long has this judge been there? Has this judge written any environmental opinions? Does this judge have an attitude about environmental cases that you can discern? Or about lawyers with long hair when they had hair? Those are all the things you got to know. So I said, okay, well, we won't go for that. We'll go for dams that turn over every year. Yeah, those are the big dams. And that's where the problem comes in. They turn every season. Big, deep dams turn. And so we narrowed it down to, it was still many thousands of dams, but a manageable proposition. We brought that case in the district court. Judge Hens Green, I'll get it yet, Judge Green, and showed up for trial. This is a real trial, okay, with witnesses and all that stuff, you know, the Perry Mason thing, right? Except he doesn't like Perry Mason at all. So it's me, you ain't gonna believe this, 50 lawyers. Because if you think about it, on the other side, so many lawyers in the courtroom in the E. Berry Preeminent Courthouse in D.C. that they had to bring in extra tables for the lawyers on the other side of me. And the reason, if you think about it, who needs dams? Everybody, right? If you need dams for power, you need dams for flood, you need dams for water supply, you need dams for irrigation, you need dams for everything. So by suing everybody that had a dam, I basically sued everybody. Overmatched? Not a bit. Not a bit. I won. It's gone now, this wonderful victory. It was a moment in time. It's sort of like, for those of you that have any money in the stock market, you don't have any money in the stock market. It's a bit or a micron or something, but it's not money. So this victory that I was celebrating, and you know, everybody in the world was saying, wow, look at what he did. It was gone in a heartbeat. That's lesson 4.3. No permanent victories, no permanent defeats. That became our motto in the 70s. No permanent victories, no permanent defeats. We had another one. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies. That worked pretty well then. Not so sure today. Not so sure about that today. Say something about that towards the end. More positive, maybe. And what happened was the case went up on appeal and I didn't argue it because I'd been promoted. And this is what always happens, you know. You succeed as a litigating lawyer, and all of a sudden your bosses think, gee, you should be managing the lawyers, not litigating these cases. You can do more good for the world and the institution if we turn you into a manager. Well, they took a pretty good lawyer and turned him into a pretty bad manager. You know, my Oliver always said, you're really good with good people. You're not so good with people that are not so good. So I didn't argue it, and we lost it. And we lost it before Judge Patricia Wald, who was our commencement speaker many years ago and is one of the most wonderful, talented DC Circuit judges ever. And a very strong pro-environment judge, wrote a lot of really, really wonderful environmental opinions, but not this one. She said, you know, NWF, you guys have made a really strong policy case, but you haven't convinced me that the agency has a mandatory duty here to regulate these dams, given the scale and complexity of what you're talking about. And even though it would, you can read the opinion, NWF versus Coastal, you can read it for yourself. She went on and on about how these dams cause all these water quality problems and how it would be a really, really good idea to regulate them better, and maybe EPA really should do what NWF wants it to do, but I'm not going to order them to do it. Now, you could cry and quit and run away and hide, but no. You must persevere. Persevere we did in the 70s. What a decade that was. Just imagine this. There were, I'm going to guess, no more than 15 public interest environmental lawyers. And I know this because we all used to go to DuPont Circle. And we would sit around DuPont Circle around the fountain. If you've ever been to DC, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you should go. And I think it was Gus, I can't remember who was it from NRDC that played the bongos. Do you remember? No, it wasn't Gus. Gus was the guy who brought NRDC versus Callaway, which challenged the Corps of Engineers' refusal to regulate wetland protection under the Clean Water Act and other broader waters of the United States. The first very important Clean Water Act decision. And footnote here, the Clean Water Act is once again in the crosshairs of the United States Supreme Court in the Sackett case, which will be argued in the fall. And that's the very question that Gus' case thought it had answered, or at least partially answered, in 1975, is back before the United States Supreme Court. So here's lesson number 4 or 5 of who's counting. Nothing's over. It's never over. Never over. Never over. Your whole life, it'll never be over. You're not embarked on a 10-year project here, 20-year project, 30-year project. I've been doing it for 50 years. I'm retiring my position so that somebody else can take it, because it's time for somebody else to take it and do something with it. It's always time to move. I probably stayed longer, maybe, than I should have, but certainly enjoyed every minute of it. I'm not saying that. I just mean I'm not quitting. I'll never quit. But I am retiring and stepping aside to let somebody else charge forward. So that's the idea here, is that you got to think about the long game. which means your life, your whole life, every minute of your life, for as long as you have. And I've lost way too many friends. In the last 5 years, 5 friends, very close friends. So there's no guarantees about anything. So you live every day to the fullest, and you do everything you can, and you enjoy every moment, and you enjoy your family and your friends and your work in equal proportions, and all the rest of that. But it's a long, long game. Never over. So what else happened in the 70s? Passed a lot of laws. Then the laws got attacked. And we had to defend the laws. The Clean Water Act was on the chopping block in 1977, and we won it by 1 vote by Howard Baker. I was in the Senate gallery watching it. 1 vote would have returned the Clean Water Act to the historic navigable waters definition of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. And we were able, you notice I said Howard Baker. So another point I want to make, it's too obvious to make. We didn't do anything that wasn't bipartisan in the 70s. Nothing. It was all bipartisan. It was not kumbaya. It was not a hot tub environment, okay? It wasn't like we all just got in a room and agreed. We fought like hell. We argued like hell. We disagreed. But we always got something done. Always got something done. Never left the table, never left the room, never left a legislative session without getting something. Half a loaf, quarter loaf, 1 slice, I don't care, something. Get what you can, come back for the rest later. Don't quit, don't sulk, don't pout. I came close to all those. Don't get mad. No, I did get mad. In fact, my lead lobbyist, Patricia Goss, who was our lead at National Wildlife Federation on the most important land conservation bill in the world, in the U.S. history, you know what it was? ANILCA, the Alaska Lands Bill. Because with the stroke of a pen, Jimmy Carter saved, preserved, for all time, set aside 100 million acres of pristine wilderness. That was a hell of a fight. Think about all the oil and gas under 100 million acres in Alaska. And we had to deliver the sporting community to lock up tens of millions of those acres in national parks where hunting is prohibited. And we had to sell our board and our membership, which were hunters, that the conservation of those lands in the long run was the best single thing you could do for hunting and every other form of non-consumptive use of our precious wildlife heritage, etc. So Patricia Goss sent me up to the Hill to lobby Strom Thurman. And in those days, you didn't need a whole lot to move votes. Think about it this way. There were 3 networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, 3 networks. There were really only 2 newspapers of record, the New York Times and the Washington Post. Sometimes the Miami Herald, sometimes the LA Times, mostly those 2. There was no internet. There was no social media. There was no Fox News. There was no Sean Hannity. There was no Koch brothers, etc. I mean, it was a completely different world. So when I was told to go lobby Strom Thurman, I mean, talk about a gag reflex. This is a guy whose proudest achievement was all the people he sent to the death. I don't know whether it was electric chair or what it was in South Carolina. Gus probably remembers all this. An avowed racist. And so another lesson is, you know, none of that matters. I mean, well, yeah, it matters, but none of that matters in the moment. You need that senator's vote to get the bill out of committee. So you bring You could bring 3 constituents in those days. 3 constituents from South Carolina, and you could get a sit-down with the senator. And the first thing he said is, I love our animals. I take my kids to the zoo all the time. I can tell you the name of the pandas. They weren't pandas then. What were they? Something in the zoo. What was the name of the zoo, Zig? Yeah, the National Zoo. So anyway, the conversation didn't go very well because it strayed off into areas that I should have kept my mouth shut and didn't. So Patricia Goggins told me, here's the deal. I was her boss, but here's the deal. You go to court, I'll go to the Hill. You take all those hard-charging, jugular vein instincts of yours to the courthouse. They've got no place on the Hill. You want to get anything done on the Hill, you provide information. You hear things that you don't like, you just tune it out. You never lie, unless you have to. And you're always indirect. You're always schmoozing. You're always smiling. You're always waiting for the next opportunity. You see, and those are not skills that hardcore litigators come naturally to. So that's another thing, is figure out who you are, what skills you have and haven't, and put them to the best use you can. And I did that. I won a lot of cases. I lost a lot of cases. I won some cases maybe I shouldn't have. I lost some cases. I lost some cases I certainly think I shouldn't have. But there was a limit to the kinds of skills and temperament that I had that didn't fit every situation. I had to learn that, and I had to figure out what we should all know right from the beginning, which is nobody does anything by themselves. You know that African proverb, if I want to go fast, I go alone. If I want to go far, I go together. I took a long time learning that. I was a solo gunslinger for most of those years in DC, in 8 years. I was a maverick, I was an anti-conformist, But gradually, I learned the value of teamwork and team building and morale building and sharing. And so after a pretty distinguished career in DC with NWF, in which, among other things, I got a chance to work with Zig during the challenge to the Endangered Species Act moment that his lawsuit created, TVA versus Hill, Tellico Dam, Snail Darter. His book, by the way, is still available on Amazon for, I think they've discounted it for $2.50, something like that. You should read it. It's a hell of a story, told by a masterful storyteller who was there and did it. And so one of the moments from that era that I'll share with you is when I was doing endangered species work. I was involved with the very first successful case enforcing the Endangered Species Act involving the Mississippi sandhill crane, NWF versus Coleman, Fifth Circuit. But then later, I was involved in a case called Gray Rocks, which involved the whooping crane, the sandhill crane's big cousin, the most magnificent bird on the North American continent, 5 feet tall, 10-foot wingspan, black, pure white, black tip wings, red crown, magnificent bird. The bird I saw as a kid in Nebraska with my uncle on a hunting expedition along the Platte River, which undoubtedly imprinted me forever. And I had the chance then to protect the habitat of the whooping crane on the Platte River, and I did. And it was the companion case to the Tellico Dam case, which caused the United States Supreme Court first the United States Supreme Court to agree with Zig to to stop the Tellico Dam in its tracks, but also the Congress, as the Supreme Court's opinion by Chief Justice Berger clearly asked them to do, caused the Congress to consider either repealing the Endangered Species Act outright or weakening it to the point that it was essentially repealed, or certainly just flat out exempting both Zig's project, Tellico Dam, and my project, Grey Rocks Dam, from the act. Instead of that, and because it was still a bipartisan era, the outcome was more of a compromise and the creation of something called the Endangered Species Exemption Committee, better known as the God Squad, with the power of life or death over a species. And like two disobedient students, Zig and I were sent to the Endangered Species Committee to defend our victories in these two cases. Zig brilliantly defended his, and the committee denied the exemption for Tellico Dam in the story that only Zig can tell. In my case, I learned another valuable lesson which I employed with great effect, and that was, my case was very different than Zig's in that if the gates on Tellico Dam closed, what was known about the snail darter at that time was it would become extinct throughout the world. That's what extinction means, is global extinction, completely gone forever from the biodiversity of the earth. So that was a huge stakes case, you know. It was up or down. You either agreed with Zig and the snail darter would live, or you agreed with TVA and it wouldn't. It was that clear cut. That was the issue. That was the question. The Supreme Court sided with Zig and said, no, this act is the strongest act on the books for wildlife protection. It's clear as a bell. It admits of no exception. Endangered species preservation shall receive the highest priority, regardless of the consequences to the economy or anything else, et cetera, et cetera. In my case, it was much more complicated. I was talking about a dam that was sucking more water out of a river that was losing a lot of water and therefore losing a lot of the habitat that the crane requires. Cranes are big, slow birds. Once they're in the air, they're magnificent and elegant. On the ground, not so much. Very vulnerable to coyotes and other predators. So they have to have, they've co-evolved in an ecosystem that has wide expanses, wetlands. And in this case, the Platte River is a mile wide and an inch deep. Perfect habitat for cranes. Sandbars in the middle of the river they can roost on at night safely, et cetera. So my case was different. I wasn't going to lose the whooping crane or even lose the Platte River habitat with one stroke the way Tellico Dam would have done. It was more of a nibbling effect. It was more of a whittling effect. It was more of a constant taking more and more water to the point where finally there wouldn't be a river at all. It would just be a riparian zone of cottonwood trees. So I knew I was in trouble politically with my case. So I used the victory I won stopping this massive power plant, coal-fired power plant on the Laramie River in Wyoming. It was the largest project underway that a court had ever stopped in the world at that time. They had to bring in engineers from Saudi Arabia to figure out how to mothball the construction site because of the victory I had won. And the point there is you win this big victory, and it's so big that it has a massive political backlash. It did. And now I was interfering with water rights in between an interstate water system and all the rest of that. So I had to figure out a solution in my case that wasn't a win or lose, all or nothing outcome. So we negotiated an agreement that resulted in reducing the size of the power plant and offsetting the entire water consumption of the power plant by buying other irrigation water rights and retiring them and creating the Platte River Trust for the whooping crane, which exists today. And in those days, $8 million, this is 1978, $8 million sounded like a lot of money, so I settled, cheap, as it turns out, for $8 million to start the fund. Well, the fund now has $40 million. Good investments and massive contributions from people all over the world, and it's protected 60 miles of not just whooping crane habitat, but this particular stretch of the Platte River was called by Roger Torrey Peterson, if you know that name, and if you're a birding person, then you surely do know that name, the eighth wonder of the world for migratory birds. Am I proud of that? Can you tell? I got to tell you something. There's no amount of money. There is no amount of money that could possibly substitute for the joy I get when I don't even have to go to the Platte River. I can go online anytime I want, and I can see that the whooping crane population is now 400. It wasn't even 100 when I brought the case. And I can see literally millions of people, mostly kids, being bused from all over the Midwest, far away as Illinois, I don't know, even further, I'm sure, to the blinds that the Trust has set up at strategic locations along the Platte River for people to come and see the wonder of nature. I wouldn't trade anything for that. I was able to save a lot of places. I can go to a lot. I went to one of them recently, the San Juan River. I'm not going to tell you all these war stories. But it was another river I saved. And caught some nice fish. I didn't catch any of the slabs that they talk about there, but I caught some nice fish. The 70s were the halcyon days. You know, we used to say we accomplished so much because we didn't know what we couldn't do. But it was easier then, because it was bipartisan, because the opposition was not as organized, as I don't know, capable of deception, using my words a little bit. It was a heady time. And the 80s were as well. The 80s were as well. We strengthened the Clean Water Act in 1987 with the Toxics Program. NRDC, Gus Beth's organization, had a huge, huge role in bringing that about with the so-called Flannery Decree. Towards the end of the 80s, we put together the package that became the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, which created the Acid Rain Control Program, the Stratospheric Ozone Control, Ozone Depleter Program, the Hazardous Air Pollutant Program. The last, this is the sad part, the last major significant piece of federal environmental legislation we've seen. Nothing since 1990. That's the difference. That's the difference I've seen in the world. Not because the problems have gotten any less serious. Oh, no. No, no. Quite the contrary. They've become vastly more serious. Many of you maybe saw the Lancet report that just came out and was reported in the New York Times. 1 in 6 mortalities globally are caused by environmental pollution. 9 million people died from exposure to environmental contaminants of various kinds. Most of it air, some of it lead, some of it forever chemicals and other chemicals. We lost 1 million people from COVID in the United States. It's still not out of our system. Worldwide, the loss was 6 million. Terrible tragedy. But 9 million people dying from exposure to environmental pollution and contaminants. So the 80s, for me, was an interesting transition time. I'm not going to go through every single decade. Relax. But the 80s is important, I think, to communicate a few other things that I learned that might be useful. And then I'm going to talk about the future, I promise. Ronald Reagan. Government's the problem. Massive backlash against regulation, federal regulation, environmental regulation right smack in the center of the bullseye. And the appointment of James Watt, Secretary of Interior, President of Mountain States Legal Foundation, and Ann Gorsuch Burford, Administrator of EPA. And I was, at that time, Vice President of the National Wildlife Federation, and every group in Washington, D.C. was rising up in opposition to the appointment and confirmation of both of these individuals. And the National Wildlife Federation claimed, we always claimed and always put it in every pleading we ever filed in any court anywhere, or every piece of testimony and legislation, 4 million members, largest conservation organization in the United States, in the world, I think we used to say. Probably could say that. I mean, you know, if we were forced to produce their zip codes, that might be a problem. But we were big. We were perceived to be big, and so therefore we were big, because in Washington, D.C., perception's everything. And what's interesting about NWF, as I've already mentioned, is it was a very conservative organization. Its core was hunting and fishing and trapping. And it was very Republican. And so I had, as the kind of chief, conservation advocate, I had an interesting challenge. How do I, number one, position this organization so I don't lose my job? I mean, I would be willing to lose my job, but what would that accomplish? But more strategically, we had a big card to play. When should we play it? How should we play it? So I went to Resources for the Future to a friend of mine over there, and I said, can you conduct a poll for me? That's what he does. He said, sure. What do you want to know? I said, number one, I want to know how many of our members voted for Reagan. Oh, that's a piece of cake. So we'll do an N sort, and we'll tell you. And the answer came back 2 to 1. 2 to 1 of our members voted for Reagan over Carter. I love Jimmy Carter. We love Jimmy Carter for all of his faults. He is a wonderful human being, one of the most wonderful human beings ever, I think. And it's someone who deserves a lot more credit for what he did. But anyway, that's another story. So I had to figure out, what should an organization like this do that could be most effective with this administration that had such a strong anti-environmental orientation. And I said, we're going to cool our jets. We're not going to take a position. We're going to wait and see what they do. And so then I went back to RFF and I said, now I want you to do 2 more polls. I waited almost 6 months, I think. I don't remember the dates. That doesn't matter. I waited until, and it didn't take Watt very long. We met with Watt first month on the job in his office, his ornate office in the Department of Interior building, and he had a big picture of a fox over the fireplace in the secretary's office with a big smirk on his face. The fox in the hen house, you get it, right? And we met with him, and we made nice with him, as much as we could. And then we said, we're going to hold our fire and wait and see what you do, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we went out and we started, and he gave us his 10-point program. Lease every acre of federal land. Privatize every acre of federal land was one of his top priorities. He had 10 of them. And so we waited and waited for about 6 months or so, and then I went back to RFF and I said, run another poll and ask our members what they think about these specific policies and steps that Watt has taken. And it came back overwhelming opposition. We did the same with Gorsuch. And then we went to the media. Only then did we go to the media. After we'd held our fire, after we'd given them a chance to show what kinds of policies they were going to adopt, after we asked our members what they thought of them, it got massive national coverage. I'm talking about evening news coverage. conservative Republican conservation organization calls for the removal of James Watt. You know how long it took? 3 months. And he was gone. Not because of our poll entirely, because of some stupid comments he made at a luncheon. Bigoted, homophobic comments. That's what finally did him in. And Gorsuch was gone for a variety of other scandals. The 90s. So I went from NWF to EPA in the 80s. Once we'd gotten rid of the really anti-environmental forces in the administration and Bill Ruckelshaus was brought back to EPA to replace Ann Gorsuch, Ruckelshaus put out the call to the public interest community, I need people to come back to EPA and help me clean it up and help me get it back on track. I answered that call. And I went to Boston, and I went to Region 1 with Michael Deland, the wonderful Michael Deland who passed away in the last couple of years, who was the regional administrator. And he hired me for one very specific purpose, clean up Boston Harbor. And I said, no problem. Well, of course it was a problem, but we did it. Right? Sort of? Time? Do I have time to talk about the future, or should I just shut up? Quickly? Oh, I thought I was going to go to 5. No? No. These people have other things to do? Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, we did clean up Boston Harbor. We did set a whole bunch of precedents. From there, I went to DEC here with Madeleine Kunin, the wonderful Governor Madeleine Kunin, the only woman governor Vermont's ever had. Vermont's going to have a woman representative. That's for damn sure. That's a good thing. U.S. House of Representatives. And I hope it's Molly, but it's going to be a woman. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up. So I'm gonna wrap it up by talking about what's facing you all. I mean, you know all about the climate crisis and the emergency. I think Gus's work is what I would recommend that you read. His trilogy of books, first of all on the climate crisis in a much larger swath of social, health, safety, economic issues that is facing the U.S. and the world. So read his books. And also read the work that his new systems economy, new economy center is producing. It is a systems challenge. I'm just piggybacking, cobbing from Gus's work when I say this. The last thing I'll share with you is environmental law is pretty much done. It's pretty much run its course. The solutions to problems like climate and biodiversity loss, which is the twin existential, as the scientists term it, threats to humanity, not just threats to the Earth. It's not the Earth. The Earth will be fine. It's not the Earth that's the problem. The Earth has seen the loss of 95% of life on Earth in the major extinction event. No, it's humanity. It's human civilization as we've known it. It's the quality of life, the condition of life, the survivability of parts of the planet that we're talking about, literally, that we're talking about. So environmental law can't do that. It's clear it can't do that. But systems change, it really does mean everything, every facet of life. It's not just energy and transportation and buildings and appliances, although it's all of that. It's the food we eat, it's the clothes we wear, it's the way we use the internet, it's the way we invest our money, it's whether it's cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or whatever. Every single possible aspect of human life is related to the climate crisis. If the climate crisis can't be fixed, nothing else matters. If the climate crisis can't be fixed, nothing else matters. It's that simple. That simple. But if the climate crisis can be addressed and managed, it can't be solved, it can't be avoided. It can be managed, it can be reduced, it can be not even minimized, but it can be managed. That's where we're at. But to do that means every single aspect of human life has to change. And lawyers are going to have a critical part to play, and other professionals, obviously, are going to have critical parts to play in how that plays out. All of these targets that you hear about, 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement, those are valuable, targets and goals. The point is that every ton of carbon pollution matters, every acre of habitat matters, and everything that we can do to reduce that level of pollution and to conserve the remaining habitat on Earth is going to be important, and it's going to be important forever. And there's going to be any number of ways to do it. It used to be that I had a real bias for producing from our program lawyers going into the kind of field, the kind of work I did, public interest and government work. It doesn't matter anymore. You can go anywhere in our system and do good. You can go into the private sector. I did, and I did good in the private sector, and I'm proud of what I did in the private sector with Perkins Coie in Portland, Oregon. Very proud of what I was able to do there. It doesn't matter, frankly, these days, where you go with the skills and knowledge and competencies and drive and determination you have. You can do good and make a difference everywhere. And you should. Just find it and do it. And if you find ways of changing and doing even more, then do that. That's what I did. It can be done. It's critically important to think that you have to just keep at this. These days, we have three challenges in front of us on climate. And biodiversity, they go hand in hand. But three challenges. One is to get these emissions down. Net zero you hear about by 2050. Talking about what happens in 2050 is irrelevant. It's what happens tomorrow that's relevant. So getting these emissions down, eliminating fossil fuels entirely, all of that kind of work has to happen sooner rather than later. It's not going to happen fast enough. We're probably not going to stay within these guardrails that the scientists are telling us we should stay within. We're probably going to overshoot them, which means we go to number two. Door number two is adaptation and resilience. And we're going to have to invest a whole lot of time and money and effort on that. But if we do that and not keep focusing on emissions reduction, we're going to get to a point where adaptation is not possible. It's probably not going to be possible for many areas of the world right now. Do you see what the temperatures are in India right now? Do you know what the wet bulb temperature problem is? Do you know that human beings cannot survive when the temperature reaches 110 and the wet bulb temperature reaches 30? Humans can't survive unless they're in an air-conditioned environment. Are you going to air condition India? Are you going to air condition China? Are you going to air condition Africa, etc.? No. No. So you're talking about, at the same time, you've got to find ways of building in adaptation and resilience. You can't take your eye off the emissions issue. You can't take your eye off the transition from fossil as fast as possible. As fast as possible. Justly, yes. Fairly, yes. In a way that makes sense and is durable, yes. It's got to be done. It has to be done. At the same time, we've got to bone up and beef up all these adaptations. I was going to go fishing in Flagstaff, Arizona last month, only to find out the place is on fire. Flagstaff, Arizona, for crying out loud, in April is burning, okay? So forest fires in New Mexico are out of control. They had to evacuate Las Vegas. I know Las Vegas. I know the mayor of Las Vegas. I've been there, gave a talk there. So, I mean, these things are happening real time. So the adaptation challenge, the resiliency challenge, the moving people out of harm's way challenge, it's right there in the face of it. And now the third one, and then I'll shut up. The third one is everything that I'm talking about that we're going to have to do is not enough. We've now reached the point where it's clear from the science that we're going to need technologies to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Some people call it geoengineering, planetary engineering, whatever you want to call it. There's no doubt about it. We are going to put more carbon, and by carbon I'm talking about methane and nitrous oxide and a whole bunch of greenhouse gases, but carbon for short. We know that the atmosphere is going to be overloaded with carbon, and that the Earth's climate is going to be increasingly unstable and chaotic and dangerous, and that carbon is going to have to come out of the atmosphere, and something is going to have to be done with it when it's taken out of the atmosphere. It's going to have to be sequestered, buried in safe underground sources around the world. So those are the three huge challenges. And it's going to be a lifetime of work to deal with those three challenges. The good news is everything that we do to address those things is going to make life better for everyone. It's going to reduce pollution overall. It's going to address environmental injustice and embedded racism. Because everything you have to do to address those kinds of issues in every sector of the economy, every aspect of human behavior is going to address all those connected social problems. And they are all connected. They're all connected. It's good work. It's challenging work. It's scary work. But we've got no choice. We just have to do it. Good luck.
Thanks, everybody. I don't think we have time for Q&A, but there we go. Thank you, Pat.